One of the best ways that the elites try to condition the masses is through the mainstream media, specifically through the music industry and the film industry. The use of music in movies portrays subliminal messages. What are subliminal messages? Subliminal messages are images, words, and statements that give evidence and clues as to what's going to happen next, that are perceived by our brain unconsciously. So, to a certain extent, you do have to be aware to interpret the underlying messages. There are various movies that I have seen that acted as subliminal messages as to the upcoming COVID-19 pandemic. You got to understand that during the 2010s, that acted as a buffer zone, as a testing period for what was going to happen when the pandemic 19 pandemic got released. It got released at the end of 2019 and then it blew up in 2020. So the whole 2010s, the elites try to drop hints, indications, red flags, signs that of what was going to happen. So yes, they dropped these subliminal messages and only a certain amount of people interpreted the true meanings. During the 2010s, I was a high school student. I graduated high school. I was a college student. I graduated college. And surprisingly, I graduated college in 2019. It becomes a pandemic at the end of 2019, heading into 2020. So again, the 2010s acted as a testing period, as a buffer zone. They're gonna drop these hints and pieces of evidence in movies and music, whatever, in logo. And when it became a pandemic, it's like they acted as if like, don't act all surprised now. We gave all the clues and pieces of evidence as to this happening. But it required people to be woke to a certain extent, to be aware of what was going to happen. So they do this all the time. I'm pretty sure prior to 9/11 happening, there were movies portraying airplanes hitting buildings all the time. Even if you take a look at George Bush Sr., this was George Bush's dad. When he was president, he gave a speech about the New World Order. And he gave this speech on September 11th, 91, either 1991 or 1990. But this was on September 11th. He gave a speech about how the US had to be the influence and spread the New World Order. And 10 to 11 years later, his son was the one that, I guess, did what he needed to do to make 9/11 happen. So these happen all the time, these subliminal messages. It's like we're gonna give it to you in speeches, in music, in movies, and you guys interpret what the future actions of what we're gonna do. Happens all the time. It's notorious here in the US, but it also happens in other regions of the world. It happens in Africa, happens in Europe, it happens in Asia, etc. So this is nothing new. This is something that has been going on throughout our history. So there are certain movies that I have seen that acted as subliminal messages towards the 9/11, the that acted as subliminal messages towards the COVID-19 pandemic. These movies include the various Purge films, the Batman trilogy, World War Z, and Get Out. So again, everyone may be different, but these are films that I have seen throughout the 2010s that acted as subliminal messages, as major clues and key evidence as to this major event happening before it occurs in the picture. So I'm going to start first with The Purge. The Purge, it wasn't just one film, it was various Purge films. but they all had the same theme behind it. So what I plan on doing, I plan on discussing how I interpreted these films. I'm gonna explain how I interpreted these films and how they relate to the COVID-19 pandemic, starting with The Purge. The Purge was how the government granted access to the citizens to killing, murdering, and doing any form of illegal acts for one full night, which is equivalent to 12 hours. There are various reasons to why the government wanted people to partake in the purge. One, the government wanted to depopulate certain groups of people. They've noticed that over the years that there were too many people in the country, and it's like, okay, let's use one night to deplete certain people. Two, in the movie, the government wanted citizens to partake in the purge to get rid of useless people. Let's be honest. Certain people, the government feels like you are no use to us. By you being alive, we have to provide to you. So if we get rid of you, that's good for us, especially the people that stay in the hood, in the ghetto areas, low paying people, etc. They wanted to get rid of those people. So what better other way to get rid of those people than have a purge? So that's what I interpreted the purge when I seen the movie. How does it relate to the COVID-19 pandemic? It relates to the COVID-19 pandemic because it gave a sneak peek into how society would be if it was to fall. If society was to crumble, that's how the purge would be. And the COVID-19 pandemic gave a glimpse of a fallen society. Basically, it foreshadowed the deaths of a fallen society. Just gave a sneak peek of it. It's like, yeah, we're still a superpower, but the pandemic and the amount of events that are happening in the pandemic give hints as to how society would be if there was to be no rules. And that's how the purge was. The second factor, the second movie that I have seen that portrayed as a subliminal message towards the COVID-19 pandemic was the Batman trilogy, specifically the last two films, not the ones that happened in 2019, not the ones that happened in 2005, but the ones that involve the Joker and Bane. So there's two lessons that I learned in these two films. One is that the police are useless. The police are voiceless and they're puppets. And by being voiceless and being puppets, they don't mind if certain criminals get away with certain things. To be honest, the police are criminals themselves. And that's why they felt so offended when the Batman started helping people and stopping crime, because they felt like, why are you doing what we're initially supposed to be doing? And the Batman starts doing these things and they portray him as the villain. So that's the first lesson I learned. The second lesson is how the Batman trilogy gave a long-term viewpoint on how society would be if it was to truly collapse. Remember, in The Purge, I said how it gave a small glimpse view on how society would be if it was to collapse. The Purge was one night, which was 12 hours. In the Batman trilogy, specifically the ones involving the Joker and the ones involving Bane, it gave a long-term view on how society would be if society was to truly collapse. Bridges fall. You will have, people retaliating at the highest level. So if society was to fall completely for months to years, you would have the useless, those that were rejected by society, those that had a low social class. You would have those people finally have a voice, that would finally have a platform. And in the Batman films, who are two notorious figures that had a voice when society finally crumbled? The Joker and Bane, they finally became representatives of the people. The third factor is to why I believe is the third pause. The third film as to why I feel like foreshadowed the upcoming COVID-19 pandemic was World War Z. Another movie similar to World War Z was Contagion. It was another virus involving movie, but I did not watch Contagion. I watched World War Z, so I'm only going to describe World War Z. World War Z involved Brad Pitt being a family man, a husband who wanted to help his family not attract this virus that turned people into zombies. So think about it. World War Z is kind of similar to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I don't even got to explain how I felt like World War Z was similar to the pandemic. That's self-explanatory. But if I'm to give another reason why I felt like World War Z was similar to the COVID-19 pandemic is because it made you internalize your different forms of morality. What do I mean by that? In the movie World War Z, Brad Pitt, a good, loving family man and husband, had to do some dirt to make sure his family wasn't going to get this virus. So there were times where he was going to have to push certain people out the way to make sure that he was going to make sure him and his family were going to survive. So how does what I interpreted in this movie relate to the COVID-19 pandemic? Again, these movies act as subliminal messages. So what I seen in World War Z, it portrayed in real life in the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's like when this thing becomes a pandemic, how far are you willing to go to question your morals? Are you going to push this individual to get access to that last mask? When someone sneezes in public, are you going to say bless you? Or are you going to mug them as a way to say, do you have the virus that could lead me to getting it? So your morals start being questioned. When you go out to Walmart, Kroger, or Publix, are you going to limit yourself to getting a certain amount of toilet paper or water? Or are you going to care about other people? So World War Z just showed me how this man acted barbaric to saving his family. I'm pretty sure he was a moral man prior to that virus in World War Z being released. But when it got released in the movie, this man didn't care about morals anymore. He got straight to it. In his mind, it was what's in it for me and my family. You could relate it to the pandemic. Again, people pushing people out the way to get away from to get access to masks. People looking at people funny when they're sneezing in public. People being greedy and grabbing multiple amounts of water, toilet paper, hand sanitizer during it. Or even this, when you see people barging into Target, Kroger, because that's something that happened. People were vandalizing. People were breaking into stores, going in there, getting access to whatever they were getting in these stores. If you're a good moral person prior to this happening, you would probably be like, oh no, I'm not going to partake in this. But since this is a global pandemic and you see people rushing into stores, breaking, taking things, are you going to question your morals? And are you going to be like, you know what? Let me go in here and take certain toilet paper and tissues and water bottles and certain assets that are going to be beneficial to my family and I. So World War Z, it questioned your morality. The fourth film that acted as a subliminal message towards the COVID-19 pandemic was none other than, so Get Out was a film where a white woman was deceiving her black boyfriend into making it seem like she deceived them. She was like, I'm gonna have you thinking that I love you, when in reality she wanted him auctioned off to her family so that her family could remove his conscience and replace his conscience with that of an older white person's conscience. So How does what I interpreted in Get Out relate to the COVID-19 pandemic? It added a layer of deception. During the COVID-19 pandemic, people were deceived left and right. The media acted as deception. People you felt like you knew all your life acted as deception. Even knowledge was deceptive because, and this is notorious because me as a biology major, when I was in college, they say vaccines take many years to. This COVID-19 becomes a pandemic. All of a sudden, as soon as it becomes a pandemic, a couple months to a year later, scientists say that they have a vaccine to treat this pandemic or virus. So all of a sudden, I'm supposed to believe that what these scientists say in the news is supposed to be inserted in my body. So what I seen in Get Out, which was a movie that came out in the 2010s, it related to the COVID-19 pandemic in the sense that it acted as a layer of deception. I don't, you can't trust friends at the time. You can't trust, even family members started acting funny. People's characters started acting funny. And all of a sudden now I'm supposed to believe what the media is saying, that I'm supposed to take this vaccine that is going to be responsive, it's going to be beneficial to my body, even though you scientists did a good job identifying the origin and roots behind this virus. So again, a lot of questions, a lot of thinking. But those various films, I believe, acted as subliminal messages as to the upcoming COVID-19 pandemic. And these are all movies that came out in the 2010s. So me being young during high school and college, these were dropped as regular movies, but the elites, they're dropping these movies as a way to tap into your conscious, as a way to tell you what's really going to happen without openly telling you. So these movies acted as that, and it took a certain amount of people to interpret the true deaths. Again, from to sum it up, The Purge, it acted as a short-term glimpse into what a fallen society would be, because these people, they acted as savages for 12 hours, which is one full night. Then you got the Batman trilogy. It gives you a long-term viewpoint on how society would be if it was to truly fall. And that's something we experienced in the COVID-19 pandemic. We're just seeing people dying left and right. And you have all these social movements, the George Floyd protests, the the Me Too movement was still raging around the time. Athletes were disagreeing with certain things. You have all this injustice happening in your country. So it gave you a long-term viewpoint on what would happen if society was to truly collapse. That's what I seen from the Batman films. Then you got World War Z. This man trying to save his family. So in real life, in the COVID-19 pandemic, regular citizens, they had to question their morality. Are you going to be a dirty guy to do what you got to do for you and your family to survive? Are you going to run up a bag? Are you going to mix good money with bad money as a way to make sure you and your family survive? And then the fourth film, Get Out, me watching it, um, it wasn't necessarily a race thing that I gathered, because most people thought that it was, oh, white people are not our friends, white people versus black people. It gave more of a deception type of vibe where, you know, just be watchful of the people that are gonna be in your corner when this virus is released. So that's what I got out of the film. Knowledge became deceptive. Just everything became deceptive. It was like a fight for knowledge, a fight for friendship, a fight for staying alive. So, what do I want people to gather out of this Um, I'm not saying to consistently be listening to music or watching movies, paying attention to the subliminal messages. No, I guess what I'm saying is make sure you have an eye for what is going to happen next. You always want to be attentive. Um, but for you to be attentive, you gotta do activities that pertain to what you enjoy doing in life. Because the signs were all around us. The signs were all around us. Some people took it in, interpreted it. Some people got the signs, ignored it. So I guess in a way, you do have to know yourself indeed to interpret subliminal messages. You can't be someone that's trying to know what your life purpose is and then watch a movie thinking that that's gonna lead you to interpret the next big event that's gonna happen. So I do have to admit that you do have to know who you are. You can't be a crowds pleaser. You have to know indeed what you want to do in life, because once you see these subliminal messages, you're gonna interpret it easily. It's gonna come to you naturally. It's gonna hit. So know yourself. Know what you're trying to accomplish out of life. Because that's what these elites do. They drop hints, but they know that the dumb ones won't catch these messages because they're dumb. They do things in their day-to-day life that are meaningless to them. But there are certain people, very few know who they are, know what they want to accomplish. So when you look at things, you're going to interpret it right away. So this is more of know who you are as a person, know what you want to accomplish. And by doing that, whatever these elites are going to try to throw at you is, signs of deceiving you, you'll interpret all of that. Because I'm a kid interpreting movies that are being released in the 2010s as to foreshadowing the next big 9/11 attack, aka the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm a kid interpreting this. I'm a nerd interpreting all this. So that's that.